Okay.
Okay,
All right. If you can start by saying and spelling your name for me.
sure. My name is Samara Klar, and that's spelled Samara Klar.
And what is your title?
I'm professor of political science at the School of Government and Public Policy at the University of Arizona.
So, do you think, was this expected pretty much?
It seemed as though she had a pretty uphill battle to climb. I mean, polling numbers for Senator Sinema have been low for quite some time now, and there haven't been a ton of polls, and it's early, it's pretty early to start making too much of horse race polls, but it didn't look as though she had a lot of support. She herself had released a plan for victory that included some pretty optimistic numbers, getting something like 30% of Republicans, 70% of independents, and that was going to be hard. So, I mean, I think it was a pretty unlikely victory, and I think that's what we're seeing reflected today in her announcement.
Fair to say she wasn't popular with the Democratic Party.
That's correct. I mean, when she switched her official allegiance to the independent label, it seemed then that she was potentially trying to salvage her political career at that point. Her numbers had fallen so low with Democrats. I mean, her approval rating among Democrats was, in some surveys, 7%, 10%. And so seeking out the independent label was sort of a Hail Mary kind of situation for Senator Sinema. And probably the numbers she was looking at were the same numbers we were all looking at. It just seemed unlikely that she was going to be able to get a victory.
When you're a senator, I mean, are you allowed to voice different opinions, or it's just what she voiced different opinions on?
I think being a senator is one of the hardest jobs there is because you really have two competing constituencies that you're trying to represent. So on one hand, Senator Sinema and any senator, Senator Kelly, whoever you want to look at, they've got to represent the state of Arizona, the people who actually voted them in. But because they're part of the Senate, because they're part of this broader national movement, they also have to be seen as supportive and loyal and integral to the national party and to the national party movement. And those can be two really difficult constituencies that compete against one another at times. And if you look, for example, at a governor, somebody like Katie Hobbs, she's sort of untethered when it comes to national politics. Her job is to represent Arizona and Arizona alone. So she doesn't have that same conflict that she's battling with. And I think it's a really hard position to be in. To be honest, if Senator Sinema had more of a governor-like position, if she was only beholden to Arizona and potentially not to the country more broadly, I think she probably would have been a lot more popular.
She was a person who became hawkish on the border. Will she be remembered for that, do you think?
Well, it's going to take some time to really figure out what her legacy will be. I think she will always be remembered as being part of this new wave of Democratic candidates who started to see a lot of success at the tail end of the Trump administration. Sinema was one of the first Democratic candidates to win in Arizona at a time when Arizona had not been electing Democratic candidates at the national level. And so she really was one of the first, and she sort of ushered in a bit of a blue wave here in Arizona, where we now have Mark Kelly, we have Katie Hobbs, we're seeing victories by Democrats. And so I think she really did play an important role to play. And I would say in the long term, she will probably be remembered sort of for that role that she played in that movement.
Her likely replacements could be Carrie Lake, or is it Ruben Gallego? Give me your thoughts on that race.
Well, I think Ruben Gallego and Carrie Lake are probably both relieved to finally get an answer out of Sinema. They've both kind of been sitting around waiting to get moving here to figure out who they are running against. So this probably comes, in a sense, as a big relief to them because now they can focus their efforts on just one opponent rather than having to balance their campaign opposition against two different, very, very different types of opponents. So Gallego can now take more of a, center left position in this race. Carrie Lake potentially doesn't need to worry about Republicans who may have otherwise strayed toward Kyrsten Sinema. They can both sort of establish more of a traditional two-party campaign, assuming that's what we stick with as the campaign continues. And frankly, they can get their campaign started. I think everybody's kind of been on hold waiting to figure out who is running in this race.
You had Joe Manchin, who's not running now, Kyrsten Sinema. Were they kind of thorns in Joe Biden's side, if you would?
Well, I think it depends on the narrative. It depends on the day. Manchin and the Sinema, at the end of the day, they were supportive of Joe Biden in a lot of ways. And I think that they potentially voted with the Democrats a lot more than people realize. Typically is the exception rather than the rule that tends to make the news, but they were known for some pretty high salient, high profile rejections of Biden's agenda. Overall, I think that they were largely more or less in line with the Democratic Party, but they differed in ways that made it difficult for them to maintain support among Democrats.
Am I reading this wrong? I feel like Republicans kind of liked Sinema.
Well, they liked Sinema more than Democrats did, but when it comes down to Sinema versus a true Republican candidate, I don't know if Republicans were ready to abandon a Republican candidate for Sinema. Now, Carrie Lake, of course, has her own challenges with Republicans in Arizona, having already lost her own election the last time she ran. But if we say, if we look at approval rating among Democrats and Republicans, Republicans approved of Sinema more than Democrats did. That's not to say that they would vote for her, especially in a race against another Republican.
Considering that she wasn't that popular with Democrats, would the eventual Democratic nominee for Senate want her endorsement?
That's a great question. I don't know how toxic she would be to a race. I mean, I don't know if people dislike her that much, or if they were just more disappointed in her failure to uphold the Biden agenda. My sense from what I'm seeing is I'd be surprised if Sinema wanted to endorse anyone. I mean, she is pretty committed to this independent label, and I think it would probably hurt her brand more than anybody else's for her to start associating with one party or the other. I think she's probably the one more than anybody who would like to stay out of a two-party race.
Do you see Sinema running for anything else? You see her reappearing somewhere?
I don't know what her political future holds. I mean, she's obviously in many ways a very savvy politician. She won a difficult race. She beat a well-known Republican in her 2018 Senate race in Arizona. So I think, there's probably a lot of different directions she could go, but I cannot predict the future. I'm not sure what her plan is.
Okay. Anything I missed that you want to add?
No, the only other thing I would add is that Arizona does have a very large proportion of independents. Over a third of Arizonans register as independents rather than as Democrats or Republicans. So I think initially a lot of people saw that as a good base of support for Sinema. But an important thing to remember about independents, whether it's in Arizona or across the country, is that independents are a really politically diverse group. They're an ideologically diverse group. They don't typically have a cohesive ideological preference. About half of independents are a little more conservative, about half are a little more liberal. So it's very difficult to cobble together this very heterogeneous group of voters and try to use them to support an independent candidate. And I think that was what she was potentially hoping for, and it wasn't possible.
Okay, I'm pretty much done, but let me throw out one wild question just because
Okay.
I'm asking it. Do you think Trump would ever put her on a ticket?
Great question. Would Trump ever put Sinema on a ticket? I don't predict the future, and I certainly do not predict the future when it comes to Donald Trump, who tends to be an unpredictable person. I don't see any reason why Trump would have any loyalty to Sinema at this point. He tends to reward people who've been very personally loyal to him. Sinema has in no way tried to associate herself with Trump, so I wouldn't see her as a likely ally for Trump in the future, given that she seems to have avoided that. In fact, it seems that what she wants to avoid are major national figures from either party.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, it's always nice talking to you. Have a great day, Michael.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.